In this setup session, I'm going to texture the windows of a building so they have a diversified look. So many times when we worry about random, it's not because we want actual, truly random things, but we want to have some plausible variation, something that looks more like the things we see in the real world. So in this case, here's are the parameters that I'm going to build up. I want the windows to have two tones, one warm, one cold. I want to have some variation on the hue and the saturation of the color. I want to have some variation on the light intensity, so the luminosity in this case. And I also want to distribute the fact, some windows just have their lights off. It's not about a variation of luminosity. Also, I want to have some variation on the height of the blinds. So some windows have their blinds all the way up, all the way down, something in between. And I also want to connect the height of the blinds with the probability that the lights are off. So when the blinds are almost closed, the lights are probably off. So, when someone leaves the house, they close the blinds, they switch off the lights, etc. So there's bigger probability that both take place. So in this case, I have this building that is composed of two layers, the concrete layer and the windows layer. So here I can see that with the polygon info, I can see that they are numbered, and I'm going to use the Denis Pontonier part move to access something similar. It's just that, since it's index, in this case, it's going to start at 0 and it's going to end at 47, but basically I'll have 48 windows, and the number of them will be useful to generate a pseudo-random number. So all the windows have shared this UV, and this UV will be used to map the blinds alpha texture. So this texture will be used to mix two colors, I dare to say two materials. So here is the blinds alpha applied. Let's look at this in layout. So I have here my building. If I turn on VPR, all the windows are up. The basic setup here is I have two materials, one for the windows without the blinds and one for the blinds, and they are mixed here in Material Blender. Controlling this blend is the UV that is animated, or that is displaced by this subtract node. So with this UV node by dpkit, I can displace the positions of the UV, and then it's feed onto this color layer where it's holding this texture, the alpha of the blinds. So this means that I can, even though I'm using a UV texture, I can displace the UV. So here I can see that by putting this to 0. And if I put it to 0, you see that now the blinds are all closed. If I put, say, to 0.5, I get something in between, open and closed, etc. So this parameter allows me to control the height of the blinds. So I'm going to put them up, all the way up. And so it's going to control here this Material Blender by LWNodalSetups tools. So first thing I want to look into is how to get random colors in the way I mentioned them here. So I want to have random hue and random saturation. When I come here and I check make color node, you notice that it's red, green, and blue are its parameters. So it doesn't work that great for that type of approach of hue, saturation, and brightness. Instead, I'm going to use a node by LWNodalSetups tools called Simple Color Corrector with a hue in color, and it allows me to have a base color. In this case, it's going to be red. And I can manipulate the brightness, the hue, and saturation. So this is where I'm going to plug my pseudo-random scaler. So here I'm using part move to access the number of the windows, the index, and I'm going to use those as my seed in the random scaler node. So now if I come here and I have a range from 0 to 1, and I plug this, say, on the brightness, you can see right away there's some variation. Now let me put some variation on the hue. Hue parameter requires a range that goes from 0 to 6. So this way, when I plug this in here, you can see that now I have random hues. So it looks pretty good. Now let me then so put this on brightness and on saturation, and right away you'll see a problem is that I have some correspondence of random across the parameters. So the same random values that are used to define the hue are also used to define the brightness and the saturation. So this means that I'll have things corresponding. So for example, I have these purple windows are also the windows that have the most saturation and the most brightness. So this is not, this does not give me a diversified look. It seems that it's favoring one part of the rainbow. So what I need to do is to offset the random scalars for each parameter I use them, so that I have an offset in the seed range. So to build up that offset in the seed range, I can just use a scalar add. And since I'm using, I have 48 windows, I can just add 48. This way I know the seed ranges won't intersect. And in this case, let me put this here. I'm gonna put this here, and I'm gonna connect this onto brightness. Okay, so right away, see that there's some things that changed. So I'm gonna do the same for the saturation. So here I'm gonna put add, and here I'm gonna do 48. So I need a different seed range. So I'm gonna do a multiple of 48, so say 48 times whatever, just click some numbers, and that's it. Okay, so this looks much better. It looks with something that is more plausible in terms of variation of color. There's no repeating pattern, and so this kind of solves the issue about dealing with color with brightness, hue, and saturation. So I'm going to try to solve the first thing I mentioned here, the two tones. So I'm going to have two of these nodes. I'm going to have one with a warm color, let's say something yellowish, like so. Maybe it's a bit too strong, I don't know, let's see. Okay, and another one that is a bit more cyan or green, a cold tone, something like this. It's okay. So now I want to distribute them, but I don't want to distribute them randomly. So I could come here with the logic node and say that if the ID, actually I cannot use this node, I have to use a logic that has vector outputs. So I'm going to use this Akira Azagi logic node, and so I could put the polygon ID here and say that if the ID is less than, say, 24, I want I want it to be cyan, or actually in this case it's not less, it's bigger than 24. I want it to be warm. If it's less, I want it to be cyan. So I can, of course, I can use this, slide this and basically see this distribution, but this distribution is not very interesting, right? I want to have some random distribution. So instead of using this value straight away, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this random node, can be, say, this one here, and this second value will act as a threshold. So I have this go from a range from 0 to 1, and let's say that I want 50% of the windows to be warm. So I put 0.5 in there, and I can see that I have them evenly distributed 50-50, but I can change this threshold. So if I put, say, 0.2, now I'll have more of them to be warm. But say if I put 0.8, I'll have more of them to be cold. So I can basically tinker with this to have the a bias in the distribution. In this case, I think I will want more windows with a warm color, so I'll leave this at 1/3. Okay, so the color distribution is solved. Maybe I don't like the way it looks, so I have 4 cold windows in a row. That doesn't look very nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tinker with the offset, so 48 times something, until I get something I like. So this looks better. Let me try something else. Nope, just one more. Okay, I'll fly with this. Okay, so I have the tone distribution solved. Now I want to work on the hue variation. So the hue variation requires a range that goes from 0 to 6, but of course I don't want all that variation. I just want a slight variation. So I think I'll go from 0 to 1. Let's see, what does that do? I'm gonna put it in here, and yeah, maybe it's too much even. Say 0.5 is okay, 0.8. And so from minus 0.8 to 0.8, so it has some variation to the left and to the right. Okay, maybe a bit too reddish. So okay, let's say minus 0.5 to 0.5. Okay, yeah, I think that's fair. Let's see if that works all right for the cold tone as well. And let's see if how does this look. Okay, doesn't look too bad. Let's work on the saturation now. So I want this to either be 1 or 0.2. I don't want something to go completely white. So if I put saturation 0, I will have things going into white. Okay, so let's see how this two look individually. This one looks all right, and this one looks all right as well. I think I'm gonna leave it for now. So now let's look into the luminosity. So I want to have some variation on the luminosity. So I'm just going to copy paste. And whenever I do copy paste of a random scalar, I have to check, if I'm using the range that I need. In this case, I don't want, since I'll have a parameter to deal with the fact that the lights are off, I don't want to have 0 in here. So I'm going to leave 0.2, and the luminosity, I want to have some, some powerful luminosity. So maybe I'll put something like 2 in here. And so I'm going to put this in here, change my seed range. So 48 times something, and I'm going to just apply this here in luminosity and see how it looks. Okay, so it doesn't look too interesting. Let's see if it's just a question of the seed range. Okay, it looks a bit better. Maybe if I put, say, 2.5. Okay, yeah, I think that looks nice. Okay, I think I want an effect using the UV map that I use to map the blinds alpha. I think I want to create this this effect of a gradient. So you can see that if I put the V in there, I have this vertical gradient. But instead of going, from black to white, I actually want to go from white to black. So I'm going to use this scalar invert, and yeah, now it looks okay. And I want to multiply this to the luminosity. So one way I can do that is I can use the multiply, and I can just go with this. And okay, so now I see that gradient taking place, but maybe I don't want this gradient to take place in all of the windows in the same way. So one way to have some variation in this is to use the mixer node. And so I'm going to apply this that I want to multiply. I'm going to put it on the foreground and the luminosity on the background, and I'm going to change the blending to multiply. So I get the same result, but now I can plug in here some random scalar that will give me some variation. So again, copy paste, plug it in here, check my range, it's the correct one, and I want to have some different seed range, so 48 times whatever. And so when I plug this in here, now you can see that it's not applied the same way to every window. So if I take this off, you can see, for example, that these two windows, they look similar. But when I put this in here, now this one has a stronger gradient, and this one almost has no gradient, if at all. So, okay, I have the color of the windows, and I think they are all right. Let me distribute some of the windows having their lights off. So to do that, I'm going to do something similar that I did in here, in which I'm going to build up a switch. So I'm going to use a logic node, scalar logic, and I'm going to put, let's see, this on true. And I'm going to use another random scalar node, check my range, it's okay. Change the range, seed range, 48 times something. And I'm going to plug this on A. So now I have this threshold, and I can do less than, say, this is 0, I have all my lights off. If this is 1, I have all my lights on. But if I say 0.5, I have like sort of, half of the lights on, half of them off. So this will be my threshold for this distribution. So I guess I want like most of them on, like 0.8. I think it's okay. Maybe I want to change the, the seed range to get different effects if I feel, that I want something else. And so let me see, 48 times. It's all right. Yeah, maybe I don't like these 3 black windows in a row. Let me try it again. Okay, this one looks okay. So I got the windows taken care of. Now I'm gonna look into the blinds. So I'm gonna check this part in here. So to deal with this one, so it's fairly easy in that I just need to plug here a random scalar with the different seed range, so 48 times whatever. or it can be 48 times something instead of wherever. In that case, I've put 0 in there. Let's see, back, front. Okay, so if I plug this random scalar right away with a range from 0 to 1 in here in the Y, you see that I have some variation right away on the height of the blind. So this is cool. So if let's say that I want to have some contrasted heights, meaning that I want to have more blinds that are totally closed and more blinds that are totally open, I can do this several ways. In this case, I'm just going to change this range. I'm going to go from 0 to 1 to -0.5 to 1.5. Now this will bring a problem in which that there's some values that go overboard, and now you start to have the blinds opening from the other side. So I don't want this. So to avoid this, I'm going to clamp the values between 0 and 1. Scalar clamp. And okay, so now that thing doesn't happen. But with this, instead of having 0 to 1, in which I have more intermediary values, of course, if I put something like, 0.5 to 0.6, I have all the windows with something in between, or say 0.25 and 0.75. They all, neither of them is totally open or totally closed. So if I want to increase the contrast of that, I can put -0.5 and 1.5 like I had, and now I have more of them closed and more of them totally open, and less of them with something in between. So depending on the distance I put from 0 and 1, I can control that sort of contrast. In this case, I'll leave it something like -0.25 and 1.25. So I think it's okay. Okay, so this one was easy. But what if I want to animate the blinds all closing or all opening? I have to offset this value. So I can come here and put an scalar add. And I can say, for example, since this is before the clamp, I'm going to do another clamp, because sometimes you have to do a clamper operation that you do. So in this case, since I'm going to add, I'm going to to have extra values going on, and I want to make sure they are totally closed or totally open, and I'm going to have a mixer. So this mixer will go between two values, and those values will be constant scalar will be 1, which I can put here with the color white, and -1. So -1 will close all the windows and 1 will open all of them. So in this case, I'm going to put this here in the background. Okay, so when I plug this in here, you'll notice that right away it's opening all the windows because it's adding 1. If I put at 50%, it does, it's neutral. It adds 0, so it's okay. And if I put 0, it closes all of them. So with this parameter now, I can animate, the windows, all of them going from the closed state to some random state into all of them being open. So it allows me to have that sort of transition between all of the states on all the windows. So it's cool. Now, last thing I wanted to do that I mentioned here is that I wanted the height of the blinds to influence the probability of the lights also being off. So to do that, I just come here. So this is the threshold number that controls the fact that the lights are off or not. And so I'm going to influence this threshold with the value that comes off from here. So to do that, I can do, say, a remap, and let's say I've put here the threshold of 0.8. Okay, so let's see, how can I do this? So here I know I'll have values that go from 0 to 1. I can do this two ways. I can multiply this value that goes in here. I can put here multiply node, or I can change right away the threshold value. Let me try to change the threshold value first. So I have values that go from 0 to 1 from here. So 0 to 1. And I want that to mean that when the what I say here is that when the blinds are almost closed, which means that when they are almost closed, when they're closed, it's this value here is at 0. Almost closed will be something like 0.2, right? So I want, instead of this starting at this transition to start at 0, I want to start at 0.2. When they are not almost close, I would say it's like something like 0.4. So from 0.2 to 0.4, I have a transition of the threshold. So in this case, the threshold value I have here is 0.8. So at 0.4, I want it to be 0.8. But when it's almost closed, I want it to be lower. So let's say 0.2, probably all right. Okay, so let's see if I plug this in here. Check these two windows in here. Okay, so this one had light on it, and now it has none. These three windows and this window also have light, but when I plug this in here, you can see that two of them, actually three of them, lose their light. So because they are closed or almost closed, there's a difference in the threshold that they used to have. So this way, I use the height of the blinds to influence if they are off or on. Okay, so this concludes the scalar portion of the tutorial series. Next, we're going to look into vectors. Cheers.